afflicted with psychosis stemming from paranoid delusions, the result of profound clinical depression, which itself stemmed from a lifetime of autism with some kind of schizoid features. Murad Dervish lost his mind on October 5th of 2022. He lost his mind in that moment when he encountered Dr. Meister inside the Harsh Party building on that afternoon. That afternoon, when classes were in session, open public building, many of the people in the building would know Mr. Dervish by sight. Mr. Dervish went into the building, encountered Dr. Meister in the midst of a psychotic episode, and the shooting took place. This is what actually happened in the moment, at the time of this terrible shooting. And Mr. Dervish expressed his understanding to Dr. Sullivan of the terrible nature of that shooting himself at the time he spoke to Dr. Sullivan. What had led up to that moment in time? Well, Mr. Dervish has a long history of severe mental disease. You've heard about that. I'll talk about that. He gets to the University of Arizona as a master's student. And I want you to really make that important to yourselves, to really, really think about that. That master's program is a hard, technical, scientific degree where you actually get good employment in your field from that degree. This isn't some kind of general studies that you get when you're 22 and you kind of go out and try to get a job. This is a hard science professional degree. You heard from Ms. McCauley. She now works for the EPA. She got a master's degree and she works for the EPA from U of A HAS department. This is a very significant academic program. And Mr. Dervish is admitted to that program. He wants to study atmospheric sciences. And just when you're thinking about talking about it's hydrology and atmospheric sciences, these are hard sciences. So you can imagine different people respond to different situations differently. We talked about that a little bit in this trial. But you can imagine the pressure on anybody who goes into that program. It's difficult material. It's calculus, it's mathematics, it's theory. There's a lot going on when you're a grad student in that program. And Mr. Dervish comes into that program, all of those pressures. It's not a bad thing, that is what it is. It should be rigorous. We want people to learn this material very thoroughly to know what they're doing for their livelihood. Now Dervish, when he gets there, one of the first things that happens, and you've heard about it, is he runs 500 pages on the copy. So he does something where he doesn't seem to understand how the printer works, and he runs 500 pages on the copy and gets in trouble. So that's define how he's using his highly rigorous academic hard science degree. Doesn't know how to use a flash drive. It's not a good start. Now, he's coming into this situation with severe mental health history. Next, he gets a bad grade on a test. Dr. Baker's looked at the tests. You can look at the tests. He fails the tests. But again, this is a graduate student in a highly professional academic program who can't pass the tests. And there's two tests. You'll see the documents that you have aren't the complete tests. We just got what we got in place, but you can see the grades. So he gets into an argument about the grading with the professor. This ends up with Dr. Meister. Dr. Meister's the head of the department. So it ends up in an argument about a grade on a midterm where he's in this highly rigorous academic environment. I would argue that it's pretty much assumed that you're going to get 100% on every test you've ever taken in this program. Like, you shouldn't be there if you're not able to perform at this level. And here we have Dervish getting into a fight about a grade on a test. He has a confrontation later with Dr. Meister about his dissatisfaction with the way the department handled the grading of the test. gets to, in this kind of conflict, to the point where the department decides to essentially fire him. They take away his pay, basically. Still a student, but they take away his pay. Again, not a good situation. Things go downhill from there for Mr. Dervish. He begins to communicate in a dysregulated, self-interest defeating way with the people that he is beholden to as his professors, and to the department, and to the administration. This makes no sense. It's like his mother. What are you thinking? Why would you attack your professors? Why would you do these things? It gets to the point where he gets suspended. And then he goes after Dr. Kowalski. And what Dr. Baker testified is that this in itself is evidence of the severity of his mental health defects. He is distorted in his thinking. He can't make sense of his own interests. His communication is dysregulated. You've seen them. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll just say right here that those communications months and months before this incident are not premeditation, but they are symptoms of severe mental illness. And I want to call your attention to this stipulation. And the stipulation is an agreement by the parties as to a fact. It's just that simple. So this is labeled Courts 1, and this will go back with you and read the whole thing. And what it is, it's a statement by the attorneys just to kind of summarize what's in the documents. And so I'll tell you what's there. And then if you page through it, what it is it's parts. It's a long hearing where Murad is appealing his expulsion. We talked about this before. So there's a transcript of the whole hearing. It's a very formal hearing. It's very important. Okay? And what you have is parts of that transcript. There's a lot of transcript. You don't need to see it all. Just the parts that are important as far as his conversation and actually what is his cross-examination of Dr. Mike's witness. And one of the important ones, and these are just a few words, but as we all know, words really matter. The way people talk about things, the way they interact, the effect that words can have on people. And if you turn to page 122 on what's labeled page 102. And this is Dr. Mike's. Mr. Dervish's unmasked status raised my stress level. Prior to meeting him, I was hoping to simply move past him quickly because I did not wish to be near someone who was unmasked in the hallway. And he goes on to explain why. Because he's a 4-time cancer survivor. And Dervish, approaching him without a mask, raised his stress levels. And so he reacted to that situation in that way. And then later he says, and you can read this yourself, he says, my behavior that day was subpar. And the day is November 3rd. You'll see the dates and you'll understand this. He says, my behavior was subpar. And he says that when I felt attacked, I responded in kind. I should have simply kept walking. Now, the reason that this is important is because Dervish appeals his expulsion. He has a hearing where Dr. Meixner appears as a witness, and he questions Dr. Meixner. This is on April 29th, 2022. The incident occurs on October 5th of 2022. Meixner is telling Murad, I was upset when you approached me to talk to me without a mask. That upset me because I had health issues. It's also in the time of COVID and so on. But he's saying, I'm a 4-time cancer survivor, I'm particularly vulnerable to getting sick. I was upset that you weren't masked. Then, and you can read this for yourself, he says, my behavior that day was subpar. Ladies and gentlemen, he is apologizing to Mr. Dervish for the way he acted that day. He is opening a door. In whose perception? In Mr. Dervish's perception. He is opening a door to further communication. This is a critical point. This happened in late April. Mr. Dervish, at that time, he begins, again, and we don't know exactly all of the communications, but he begins to communicate with his mother. And his mother has had, she said herself, she was estranged from Murad. They don't have much communication. It's very difficult to communicate with. But she says that in her perception, he was unraveling around that time. She couldn't make heads or tails of what he was saying half the time. He was unraveling. That's her word. Anybody can understand that what this mother is trying to say is that her son was afflicted with a mental illness that was getting worse and worse and worse. And he wasn't telling her. He was embarrassed that he was expelled. He's ashamed to be mentally ill. He denies his symptoms. He doesn't go get treatment. He's unaware of his symptoms. Okay? This is the person that is dealing with the situation. And I want to turn to the transcript of the statement of Dr. Sullivan. And that's, for the record, that states 212. You all have the audio. You just heard it from Mr. Hotchkiss a little bit. You can listen to the audio of Mr. Dervish speaking with Dr. Sullivan. And I urge you to listen to that audio. I know you've heard it before. This is a way for you to assess what is the actual facts of this case, which is that Dervish is telling the truth. He's telling the truth when he's asked questions. And you understand he's been asked questions. Well, he's spoken to the police. And I'll talk about that in a minute. He's spoken to Samuels. He's spoken to Baker. He's spoken to Sullivan. And he's spoken to Johnson. This is a person with very little insight into his symptoms. He doesn't want to be mentally ill. He's ashamed of that. He's looking back on an incident over and over and over again and trying to understand what it is that happened, what he did. And when you get to the discussion with Sullivan, all of that plays into this. You've got to think about the timing and then listen to the audio yourselves. Assess for yourselves whether it sounds to you like Dervish is manipulating and calculating. And I'm saying to you it doesn't. If you just listen to his voice, it sounds like he's telling the truth. And for the record, I'll go to some pages here. And you can listen. You'll hear it yourself. Page 57. He says, I didn't feel like it was wrong. Line 15. I didn't think it was wrong. That's what he's telling Dr. Sullivan. And he's trying to think back through all the conversations that he's had about it. And he's saying, at that time, I did not think it was wrong. And then he says, this is at page 59, I mean, the time afterward, I did understand. Again, ladies and gentlemen, he's trying to say that at the time, I didn't think it was wrong. But later on, I realized that what I did was wrong. This doesn't mean, that doesn't change the psychosis at the time, but he's talking to you through many, many discussions with the people that are trying to evaluate him. This is where I had a long back and forth with Dr. Sullivan, because Dr. Sullivan tried to get Mr. Dervish to agree that he thought at the time of the shooting that Meister, quote unquote, deserved it. And Sullivan says, you don't think it's wrong because he deserves it. This is what Sullivan says to Dervish. Dervish responds. He pauses, he inhales. No. It's like, it's like I told you last time, I felt like he had done these things to me and he was able to do things to me, a lot of other things to me, even worse to me. Dervish is telling Sullivan how he perceived Meister. He perceived Meister as resurrected. He thought he could get on his phone. You heard about that. He thought he could control his life. He thought it would never end. Mr. Dervish is afraid of Dr. Meister. And ladies and gentlemen, every one of us knows that that's not true. Dervish was psychotic. He was paranoid. He was delusional because he was depressed, because he's autistic. This is what happened over time to Mr. Dervish. So at the time, his thinking was completely wrong, and he didn't know the difference between right and wrong. That's the circumstances of the shooting. And at 62, he goes on to confirm that he knows that this was severely wrong. He knows that now. That's what he's trying to convey. there's been a lot of discussion about credibility and testing and facts. And what I want you to remember and look at is these documents. And these are documents generated by Dr. Baker. And it's going to show you wrote them, you've seen them before. You can look at all this stuff back here. So BP is one of these graphs. This is just the tabulation of the data that Dr. Baker found. So DQ, more graphs, data. And in case anyone's wondering where this information comes from, is from Mr. Dervish being given a document and filling out the document. These are his answers to these questions that are then tabulated. And by the way, Samuels did similar testing and Baker did similar testing. So I want you all to understand that that's what this is. This isn't Dr. Baker, for example, like asking a question and marking something down. Right? This is Dervish marking his own paper, and then it gets graded. And folded into these instruments are these tests of malingering. Malingering about whether you're trying and whether you're telling the truth about your symptoms that you're talking about. Remember, he said there's two kinds of this malingering. So it's both symptoms and is he putting out adequate effort? Is he really participating in this process? And you can see graph after graph after graph. Here's another little breakdown. And these aren't that complicated to understand. Anybody can look at these percentages and see what they're labeled and understand what they mean. You just put it in a way that is easy to see. BT is called the individual comparison standard. And I urge you to look through this because it shows how Dervish compares to other people. And the reason I'm saying this is to get to the credibility of the experts. There's 4 experts here. The defense hired Samuels and Baker. The state hired Johnson and Sullivan. And it becomes a question of credibility. Well, what did Dr. Baker say from the stand? He acknowledged that everybody knows people are biased. Everybody knows thoughts and preconceived notions. But what Baker knows, and what he told you very convincingly, is that the way that you keep yourself honest is you do objective testing. This is how you know that it's not just Dervish, as Mr. Hotchkiss said. Anybody can say they're GPI, and he's right about that. That's absolutely true. I could walk in and say, I'm crazy. But there's a way to assess the credibility of that, and that's the objective testing. It's also the history, family reporting, the circumstances of the case. All of those things combine together to give a credible, factual, objective demonstration. It is highly probable. It is clearly convincing that Dervish was insane when this happened. And I'm going to show you a couple of other things. Dr. Baker had this drawing test. Remember that? So there's the right figure. And it's a very interesting test because the first time you do it, you have the figure there, and then you try to draw it yourself. You can look at it, right? And then you do it twice more without getting to look at the figure. And then it's a way of testing your memory, how your lobes function, things like that. So this was something very important to Dr. Baker. Here's the one where he drew it when he could see the paper. And he wrote down the time. 6.5 minutes he spent just struggling with this, getting frustrated, erasing, redoing it over and over again. Baker said it's very unusual. Usually people just, they draw the darn figure and then they just stop. Not Dervish. And the word for that, ladies and gentlemen, is to perseverate. Perseverate, he gets stuck on something. He can't let it go. Keeps. This is consistent with autism. This is at the basis of what we have here. Later does a terrible job. And then later still, even worse. It just decays out of his mind so quickly. This is evidence of impairment. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand this. We've had a lot of discussion, a lot of arguing, a lot of stress about whether Dervish is getting treated in jail. Dervish denies symptoms. He's unaware of symptoms. Remember that. He denies symptoms, he's unaware of symptoms. These measures are taken at that location by Dr. Baker months and months later, and he's still paranoid. He's still delusional. Do you understand what that means? It means that he's still dealing with mental illness and knows how to hide it. He's come to learn. He wants to hide it. He doesn't want to be a mental person. He's not wondering, quite the opposite. He's masking his mental illness. This is very, very severe because you have a person in jail who's still paranoid. As Dr. Baker said, he elevates on the paranoid scale. Just because he kind of pretends and knows to not say those things doesn't mean he's not suffering with something. And then these other documents, what these are, is another little drawing test. And these are very important because he does well on this one. You see, Baker says he's a really smart guy. Like, he does well at certain things and does terribly at others. This is another indication that he's not malingering. Because they give all kinds of different measures, and if the person, what you see from this is that he's elevating and he's giving scores that reflect his mental symptoms. Not a guy trying to fake it and just say I'm GDI to get to a break or whatever. And you've seen these again are just the tests. You can just look at this. This is back before the turn of the year from 21 to 22. Just shows you how poorly he did on the test, which is what a lot of this came from. Now, and I'll put these away, but these are yours to look at as you go. Now, the question becomes, what's the severity of this mental health disease or defect? It's up to you to decide what the facts are in this case. And me listening to Mr. Hotchkiss, I was looking at that instruction and I was glad to hear that you're told that what the lawyers say is not evidence. Somebody spinning something, somebody turning it into something that it wasn't when you heard it from the stand, that's not evidence. Your job is to remember. It's not meant to fool anybody, it's just rhetoric. I mean, in my view, when you're using strong rhetoric in a courtroom, it may indicate that you may think there's a couple problems with the case. So you got to kind of add some metaphors and extreme language and things like that to sort of get people kind of whipped up about what they may have seen. And now you've heard the 911 call for the third time. Everybody knows this was a terrible incident. Accept it for what it is. You yell the name Dervish. You know that Dr. Meister was shot. Those things are all true. There's more to this though, and everybody knows that at this point. Your job is to find the facts and decide how to fit these charges. I'm going to write it in a second. But I did want to take a second to show you these photos. Because the question is, how severe was the mental illness at the time that this occurred? Well, look at the way the man was living at the time that this occurred. And you've seen these before, but I'm just showing them to you again. To zero in on that day. These are from the day of his arrest. He gets arrested, they figure out who it is, where he's living, they go to his place. You heard the opinion. It looks like a person living with really severe mental illness. And he told Sullivan I've been living that way for a while. And again, kind of comes down to the whole thing. Is he telling Sullivan the truth or not? You assess that, but there's all the emblems of truthfulness there. You can't just decide, like, he's telling the truth about everything, but he's lying about one thing. It's just not right. There's no indication of that. So just more of the living situation. Things broken, torn up, trash. Samuels and Baker went into this objective testing and they made the findings that they found. Autism, some kind of schizoaffective issue, something to do with intermittent explosive disorder, but Dr. Baker said that it's very hard to determine where those separate out from the autism, which can lead to depression, which can lead to psychosis. You've heard all that stuff, but it connects together, and I want you to remember it's based on data. It's based on data. Whether he's biased or not, that is Dr. Baker or Dr. Samuels, it's based on data. You can look at the data yourselves. History. His mother said, I couldn't take him shopping because he would take off running and he would run into the clothes rack and smash his head on the thing that holds the clothes up over and over and over to the point where she said, as a mother, I couldn't take him shopping. That may seem like a small point, but it gets to the level of illness that Murad has suffered from his entire life. He attacked a babysitter when he's 10 years old tonight. He tells his mother, he doesn't know why, he just did that. Again, that's an indication of a person, as she said, he was never comfortable in life. She talked about the family's trying to figure out what's wrong with him. They don't know. They're just trying to understand what it is that's going on with him, and they're trying different things. But the fact is that it has these issues. And I'll talk about credibility in a minute, but you heard me ask Dr. Sullivan, do you think the kid was drinking at 10 years old when he attacked the babysitter? And rather than just simply say the credible thing, which is like, yeah, probably not, he said, well, I don't know. Maybe he was drinking when he was 10 years old. I mean, this gives you an insight into Dr. Sullivan's role in this case. You've got to start to wonder, what is it that he is bringing to the table on this situation? Murad quit college at 18 years old. He went to college and he just up and quit. He's hospitalized involuntarily twice in 96 and 2011. And the information about that 2011 commitment is critically important in this situation. Dr. Baker said past his prologue. So if you look at what happened to Dervish in South Carolina at that time, they saw him hallucinate. They can tell that he's responding to internal stimuli. They ask him if he is, and he says, I'm not. Because he doesn't know what he's doing. What he's seeing, what he's perceiving is real to him. This is what delusions are. This is what paranoia is. This is what psychosis is. Extended period of time. I think Baker talked about 70 days when he's in, doesn't have access to alcohol, doesn't have access to anything, he's just sitting in the jail. He's still symptomatic. The court there found by clear and convincing evidence that he had been committed. So he's committed against his will. He's given injections of schizophrenia medication, and it works. And it works. This cannot be set aside. The state wants to say, oh, that was a long time ago. It's remote in time. But Baker's an expert, and he says that's very, very important because that continues to happen. That's what happened here. That's what we see here. Yeah, he talked about, he had this whole list of symptoms that Murad suffered from. He said that the mother did this sort of thing that he associated with autism, that's the dad, self-slapping. Like she'd get upset, maybe didn't go the way she expected, and she did herself. And here we have Dervish, who's born to her, and he seems to be signs of autism. Now, the state hires Dr. Johnson, they hire Dr. Sullivan. They're going to come in and they're going to evaluate. Well, how can you assess their credibility? Well, Johnson didn't do any objective testing. He doesn't do that. He's a psychiatrist. Well, we can't blame him for doing his job, but at the same time, he didn't provide you with any objective information about Dervish's situation. I went through on cross-examination his report with him where Dr. Johnson describes in detail Dervish's reports of paranoid delusions. And he just ignores it. Just sets it aside as if it doesn't matter. Why, ladies and gentlemen? Because Dr. Johnson is biased. He thinks that Dervish is lying. It's just that simple. But the issue is there's no evidence of that. He passed every malingering test at both times. Just tell the truth. Johnson says something that's not true, that delusions are bizarre. They're not bizarre. Baker says he's clearly studied this, read books about it, has literature. They're not usually bizarre. They're actually linked to what you're experiencing. Your mind takes them in and distorts them into something that feeds into your paranoia. That's the most common situation. And that's the issue with Dr. Johnson. And you've gotten some instructions about what you're to pay attention to and not pay attention to. Well, Johnson the topic that he really wanted to talk about was alcohol. And he said things he shouldn't have said. Why? Because he's biased. You all know what you heard about alcohol. Johnson's biased. You can set aside his conclusions. Look at the ones that are based on data. Let's talk about Sullivan. Sullivan, ladies and gentlemen, he told you that he's biased. He told you right from the stand the first 5 minutes of his testimony. He said it's impossible to know. Remember all that? He said it over and over and over again. And he said it's very rare. It's extremely rare that people do the job. Remember him saying that? What was the point of that? I'll tell you what the point of that was. The point of that was Dr. Sullivan, in his bias, raising the bar. He's trying to get you to raise the bar. I'm going to write CC. Clear and convincing. He knows, because he's done this before, that we've got to prove by clear and convincing evidence. That makes it highly probable that he's mentally ill and that he didn't live. Well, saying something is impossible, which it obviously isn't. It's got to be possible to find this. And saying that it's incredibly rare, it's so rare, over and over again, it's raising the bar. Where I come from, what people call that is they say he's wordplaying people. He's trying to wordplay people. He's trying to confuse you about your job. It simply isn't because we're clear and convincing evidence. This is a rhetorical device by with this underloaf that's designed to confuse you about what your job is. This is bias. Dr. Sullivan has an agenda. He has an agenda. And he's lived out that agenda in this situation. Now, strangely enough, the statement that Dervish makes to him that you recorded is critically important to the fact that Dervish is severely mentally ill and he didn't right wrong. A couple other things about Dr. Sullivan. And, this is a professional dispute. I'm not here to trash Dr. Sullivan. But I'm saying that his work in this case isn't reliable. You should literally ignore it, except for the recording you can listen to yourself. He CD. This is this notebook. The only one he was able to say before he realized that indicated what he said is manipulation by Dervish is this notebook. And he didn't grade it correctly. He gave him a high score, meaning it was an invalid test, meaning that it indicated that Dervish is lying, essentially, what it was done. He didn't grade it correctly. And anybody who can, this isn't admitted exhibit, you can read it yourself. You can look at the directions are right on here. Do you understand the importance that Dr. Sullivan is writing down Dervish's scores with the directions about how to score it right here, with him, his own underlines under how to score it, and he did it wrong. This is a twice board certified guy who's coming in here and saying that Baker's not as qualified as I am, I'm the most qualified guy, there's only 10 of me in the world, basically. And you can't grade a simple paper. That makes you wonder if maybe he can't. And maybe he's not really wanting people to understand what this means because he might be getting frustrated that this guy may actually be guilty such and such. And he's passing every malingering test. And Baker did good work. You gotta ask yourself, but I want you to look at this yourselves. Look at this yourselves. It's very important. The other thing was this weird, never-ending saga of the missing page. So he applies this test to Dervish about what we call IED. And he concludes that Dervish is not IED. And he sends Baker the test where he tested him for IED, but he's missing the second page. It's a very important page. It has a bunch of indications by Dervish about the test. Right from the center, he said, I'll just give you the page, no big deal. He tried to blame Baker for losing it. And then he didn't give him the right page. He gave him page 3, which Baker already had. We've never seen page 2. So we don't know what Dervish answered. This is the problem. Again, twice board certified, really qualified guy, one of only 10 in the world. And he said the world, he made it a point not just the U.S. He can't get page 2. It's very strange. You have to start looking at some of these credibility. And he is interrogating Dervish. You can read it yourself. I'm sorry, you can listen to it yourself. He's getting him to admit to the crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, he's got an agenda. He's prosecuting Dervish. He's interrogating Dervish. He's trying to get him to admit to these crimes. That's his job. That's his job when he's talking to Dervish. When he's going to score this and look at these things and assess Dervish, he's got an agenda. That's all bias. That is. And you get an instruction. You can accept what an expert says. You can accept what the party rejected. I asked you to reject Sullivan, and I asked you to reject Johnson. Okay. What are the pleas here? I want to be clear because there's a lot going on here. The simple Instagram post. You've got to kind of think about this. There's a lot going on here. So the top charge is first degree murder. I'm just going to say first H. Then there's AA. Then there's first B. And then there's E. For first degree homicide, there's premeditation, I'm just going to say 3M. And then there's felony murder, FLM. The plea in this case is there's not premeditation. There's not felony murder. Why? Because Dervish is innocent. To be guilty of felony murder in this case, you've got to find him guilty of first degree murder. I'm saying he's innocent. We are saying he didn't commit, not guilty except in saying that he's innocent of that charge. That takes off felony murder. What we have on the facts, second degree GEI. And I want you to understand this, and this is brutal. We have all of the people in the gallery, and you guys have done a great job of just focusing on this trial, but we know what's going on in the gallery. This is a terrible, bloody homicide. 11 shots fired, 9 shots hit the body. The man died. His own colleagues tried to save his life. There's blood everywhere. You've seen it. This is a terrible situation. Nobody would say that. Dervish said it himself. Intentional murder. That is killing somebody with the intent to kill them in Arizona is second degree murder. I want you to understand that when you read that instruction. Intentional homicide, second degree. To make it first degree, premeditated and or felony murder. And I don't belabor this, but this is very important when you read these documents. It's critical in this case. And what we're saying is, second GEI. We're asking you to hold Murad Dervish accountable. Hold him accountable for what he did. Second degree homicide, guilty except in saying. That's accountability. Same for these. Poison endangerments. Ms. Santander, Mr. Romero, and Ms. Barron. They're not in the backseat here. They're on the charges. I want to recognize that. So if these three endangerments go to them, GEI. The ag assault, Mr. Corley, GEI. That's the clue. Second degree GEI, aggravated assault GEI, Santander endangerment GEI, Barron endangerment GEI, and Yale endangerment GEI. Not guilty first degree. That's accountability. But it's accountability related to what he did. Now, let's talk about some of the actual facts. Now, you might have noticed that I had a long-ish cross-examination with Mr. Scott. Officer Scott, you might remember him, very upset, a lot of blood, he said, came into the scene right away. He was the guy that wrote his report that there were shell casings in the office. And you remember I said casing or casings? And he had to look at his report and he wrote the plural, casings. Because you guys all know now that there were no casings in the office. That's a mistake. And hey, everybody's human, everybody makes mistakes. But when you're putting the casings in the room, why are they put in the room? I'll tell you why they're put in the room. Because Corley said, and we got a diagram, that he comes into the office, and we have that horrible looking diagram where this killer is standing there and he's shooting Meister from inside the office. So now we have casings in the office. You see how this turns from one thing into another? There are no casings in the office because Dervish never came into the office. Why this is important is because of the nature of the shooting. It shows a lack of premeditation. These critical details are very, very important. When you're looking at proof beyond a reasonable doubt of premeditation, it doesn't exist because it didn't happen. That's this situation. You saw the 3 shell casings outside the office door. There was casings there. I'm gesturing with my right hand. We all saw it. You could look at the picture. The blood on the shoe. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened was Mr. Dr. Meister fell on his back. It seems from the testimony by the medical examiner that he was shot while he was laying on his back. There's no question. To help him, they pulled his body out into the hallway so they could administer aid. What had happened previous to that is that Dervish is shooting Dr. Meissner right at the door, and Dr. Meissner is bleeding. And then he walks into the office and he falls, and Dervish leaves. That's where the blood on the shoe came from. He's standing outside the doorway and he's shooting. And then he leaves. Nobody was ever inside the office shooting. It didn't happen. I ask you to discount that concept. Because it's much more vicious and premeditated to follow somebody in the office, and as he said, and I say he, Mr. Hotchkiss, administer the coup de grace. Well, this is just inventing facts that don't exist. That's what that is to show premeditation. We called a couple witnesses. We called our experts, but we called a couple witnesses because there were some really important facts about premeditation that people knew that the state elected not to address. So we called Radcliffe. Radcliffe, ladies and gentlemen, this is amazing to me. This is an engineer, very sharp mind. She knew from the very beginning that there were 11 shots fired. I mean, she knew in her head that there were 11 shots fired. That is the power of that intellect in a very traumatic situation. She had to count for everything. She was right. There are 11 shots fired. And she said continuously. Remember that? She's very clear. Bang, 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 bang. 11, very quickly. The reason that's important is because it's not bang, 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 bang. Bang, 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 bang. You see the difference? That's the person pulling the trigger continuously, and then the shooting is over. She said, because we don't have scale drawings, she said, from inside of my room, they were going to have a meeting. I said, class, they were going to have a meeting. It's close. It's really, really close. And she sees the person shooting her room. Here's what happened. Dervish comes up the hallway. Mike's was going to 122. 118 is to my right. She looks up and he's shooting. He's shooting in the room, and then it's over. Very, very close. The reason that we have a concept that it's far is because distance suggests thinking, right? We want to stretch out the distance so that Dervish had time to move and think and ponder and, yes, reflect. But as I said previously, the scene tells the tale. It's not a long distance, it's a close distance. It's sudden, quick, over. More from Radcliffe. She's in the office, she's getting coffee, she's walking around, she keeps seeing this guy. She doesn't know who he is. She's one of the few people in the building who doesn't. She physically bumps into him. And they exchange, sorry, oops, doesn't smell like alcohol, has a mask on. She sees him in different places, far away from anything that matters. At one point, he's moving west, away from where Meister lived in. He's eating a snack at some point. He's in the building for half an hour. And then the shooting occurs. You have to ask yourself, how is that the behavior of somebody who's premeditated murder? He's in a building full of people that recognize him. So it's not consistent with premeditated murder. It's just different. Whose mom? His mom's a student. She's in a classroom. The class comes to an end. She's talking to Dr. Meister. She's standing there talking to him. Meister's facing away from the door. She's looking out the door. Guy comes in, sits down. Sits there for a few minutes, got the sewing machine light going, she says, gets up and leaves. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not consistent with a person premeditated murder. It just doesn't fit. He's in there to talk to Meister, which is what he told Sullivan. Went there to talk to him. And Sullivan says, really? That doesn't make any sense. You just didn't, knew that this guy didn't like you. They go back and forth. You can listen to this again. It's because it doesn't make any sense. Because Dervish is dysregulated in his thinking. He doesn't understand. He's not putting things together. He doesn't realize it makes no sense to go try to talk to somebody who's fired and to try to get money. It just all doesn't make sense. But ladies and gentlemen, Dervish is telling the truth. That was what he was thinking. Notes. Okay. Dervish is getting evicted. He buys a van legally in his own name. He buys a gun. You know that. He's moving out of his place. Can't live there anymore. He stopped paying rent. That makes no sense. Why would you stop paying rent? He stops paying rent. We heard from one of the officers he had a lot of money in his van, $18,000. Just stopped paying rent. Gets evicted, has to live in the van. He's going to go to San Diego. Who goes to the U of A, goes to Harshbarger. He has this back and forth with Sullivan about trespassing, whether you're banned from the campus, and then Dervish says, well, it wasn't really ever actually a restraining order served. So he's a little confused in his mind about whether he can be on the campus or not. He knows that U of A told him not to be there. But one of the officers themselves said, well, that was a U of A thing. Right? Like there's a difference between legally and, the school doesn't want you on there. It's very, and I showed you an email earlier. It states, oh, it's a 2-page email, you can read it yourself. It has right in there that this doesn't bar you from campus activities. It's an email that here, this is Keating writing an email about I didn't get the exclusion order served. And we all sat there and watched and know that when Dervish gets arrested, at the end of this whole thing, Keating served him with the exclusion order. They're completing their paperwork. It had not been completed. And so the truth beyond a reasonable doubt that he was illegally in that building is lacking. On their own evidence, they have to present you with it. It's lacking. That's why he's not guilty of first degree murder. There's a reasonable doubt as to that because it's not true. He was not legally barred from that building. He went in that building, business hours, during class, you know all that. You heard the instruction about impulsivity. Well, if the person gets in a situation and they have a character of impulsivity and they act in a sudden quick way without reflection, that can be evidence against premeditation. Well, Dr. Atala came and testified on our request. And in his own text to Murad, he said, you're just so impulsive. Why? Because he's doing what he did with respect to the department and ruins his career over a test. He's sending weird emails that are just totally inappropriate, self-destructive, reacting. That's what happened. And he tells Sullivan that. He said there were words exchanged. It didn't feel real. I was locked in. Didn't have a plan. Remember that? All those things that he said, that's all right there in that audio. You can listen to it yourself. All of that indicates a total lack of premeditation and impulsive action. He's got a history of impulsive actions. is impulsive. And Mr. Hotchkiss listed the premeditation by Gunn a month before. He said terrible things to Walter. Well, she's not even in the HAS department. She's in admin. He said he's moving. Well, he's not moving. He got himself a ticket. So he's packing on his van to leave to live in San Diego. Now, he says something about Guzman didn't hear anything. But again, this is what I'm talking about, making up fiction. She said the door closed and it's soundproof. She couldn't hear. She couldn't have heard if there was some kind of argument or something like that. Dervish said there was. To close this, I may talk again, but to close this, you're going to be deliberating. And this has been a lot of information, a lot of lawyers approaching, a lot of disputes back and forth, and now you're going to deliberate. And as the instructions tell you, it's your own considered judgment about what you think the verdict should be. You're free to discuss, you don't have to discuss. If you have made a decision, you can make a decision. If everybody else wants to keep talking, that's completely fine. And this goes all ways, all votes. If you made up your mind, you can just make up your mind. The thing is, you can't leave the room. Everybody has to stay in there while people are deliberating. But I want to support everybody in exercising their own independent judgment. Look at your notes, discuss it, make your decision. You don't have to agree. You can just say, look, this is my vote, here's why. Well, you can deliberate the way you want. But I just want you to understand, it's not like a group activity where you have to kind of come to some kind of make your own decision on your own information. On the Sultan statement, look at how long it took. There's some things that are removed for efficiency. Hours that he's getting water. He's got his hands like this. He's sitting on a bench. He's physically uncomfortable. He's been up since 6 in the morning. Just on the clip that Mr. Hotchkiss played, an hour clipped by, from 117 to 158. Think about a human in those circumstances, in what he was going through. And I'm just saying, there was a little bit of effort by Sultan to get him to talk. You can see it. Everybody saw that. So he's saying stuff, and you decide whether it's voluntary or not. You decide whether he was coerced. You can set that aside. You can say, you know what, I don't think he really knew what he was talking about. I might add that he's psychotic and paranoid while he's talking to you. Just got to remember that. And so I want you to take that into consideration. Just think about what actually happened. So the shooting occurs. Calls his mother. He's still in the grip of this psychosis. And Baker says there's transient psychosis, especially with autism and brain movement. Calls his mother and says, this is very important. I hope he's dead. The state makes a big point. Hours later, he says to Sultan, I hope he's okay. He's being coerced. He's trying to make her life better. You can all pick up on that. And she's playing right along. She's talking about denial and all these different things. I mean, she's doing whatever she can to get him to keep talking. You decide whether that's voluntary or not. But I would say to you that I hope he's dead, and then I hope he's okay. Hours and hours and hours. It may actually be that by that time he does hope that he's okay, and I want you to understand. He said, I thought maybe the gun would just make some noise or something. So those words, what they mean is that he wasn't even intentionally trying to kill. I heard that your injuries are life-threatening. I hope he's dead. Doesn't say I killed him. I shot that guy. I hope he's dead. While he's psychotic, floridly, actively psychotic. Later, it's sinking in. I hope he's okay. And you see, this is what really this all comes down to. What the state's witnesses assume is that you have a vicious, they even tried to start talking about antisocial personality, person who just murdered somebody. And they start from there. And then they run around looking for evidence to back up what they're saying. What happened with Samuels and Baker is they took an objective approach, they got data, and they made their decision. And they realized that this guy didn't know the difference between right and wrong when he did this, and he's impulsive like here. The question is, look at the facts. What actually happened, all the facts. Look at his history. Look at his conditions at the time that this occurred, surrounding the whole situation. The whole encounter. Second-degree GPI. Not guilty of first-degree murder because he was committed. Guilty except in the same aggravated assault. Guilty except in the same endangerment Romero, endangerment Santander, endangerment Barron. That's the just verdict.
Mark?